Good morning, good morning. If you could all please take your seats. I am Professor Wang Fire. Welcome to the Fire Republic Academy and this semester's class on the Fire Nation period. Fire, blood, and steam power. We will be examining each of these today, as these were the currencies with which our nation once brought about the 100-Year War, wherein the Fire Nation, as it was then called, led by the then monarch Firelord Zoryu, began the first global conflict, beginning with the Air Nomad Genocide. If you could please get out your notebooks, and no laptops in my class, the information simply does not stick, and turn to Chapter 11, page 394 in your textbooks, An Articulate History of Our Nation by Su Wong. But first, a word from our headmaster. Last year, we raised over $22,000 for Crisis Text Line, helpline dedicated to those struggling with suicidality, self-harm, depression, and other mental illnesses, over the course of a 24-hour livestream. And this year, on December 4th, we are going to do even better. We're going to be raising money for the Child Rescue Coalition, which aims to rescue the millions of children worldwide currently being exploited in the human sex trade, as well as prosecuting those who are profiting off, manipulating, and exploiting these children. You will know that mental health is a big thing for me, both privately and as a part of the channel, and I want to build on the work that we did last year, because if there's anywhere that suicide, trauma, and these other things are running rife, it's with these communities of kids who have been so horrifically exploited, and I want to do my part, so I will be matching every dollar that we raise up to $2,000. I'll be joined by tons of other amazing creators across the stream, and as voted by you, I will be playing Zelda Breath of the Wild for the very first time, completely blind. This poster is on Facebook, it's on Instagram, it's on Twitter, it's linked down below, and if you can share it, please do, it will help immensely. Put it in your calendar, December 4th, it's going to be a lot of fun and we're going to do a lot of good. And that's what matters. The 100-Year War began in what we now call 0 BG, BG referring to before the genocide, which resulted in what we can now officially estimate to be anywhere between 15,000 to 100,000 deaths, as well as eliminating an entire cultural and bending group at the time. Most of you being raised here in our country, you will know it has taken a long time for our nation to reconcile with our ancestors' actions. But it is important that we confront these realities. The question is, how did we get here? How did we arrive at such devolved brutality? If we are to understand our history, it is important for us to look into the decades and centuries before, to the causes of the 100-Year War, of this genocide. As an exercise, I'll open this to the class. Where would you say the story of the 100-Year War began? Yes, Misaka.
Well, we were taught in school it began with Firelord Zoryu and Avatar Roku's friendship, Zozin's ambitions to create an empire, and their falling out.
Yes, and those teachers were wrong. A number of primary records found in the Dragonbone catacombs do detail Zozin's personal ambitions for glory and expansion, which has led to this common misconception. But history is made of economics, of cultural change, forces such as these greater than the ambitions of individual men who simply capitalize on their environment. I believe Su Wong is correct in her assessment that Avatar Sato's efforts to streamline and organize government bureaucracy between 460 and 410 BG set the stage for the 100-Year War by concentrating economic and military power in the hands of the central government and the Firelord. As the power of the clans diminished, an absolutism and cult-like culture began to form around the royal household, especially the Firelord. Yes, this period of Avatar Sato was known as the Concentration, at least in governmental circles, and it marked the beginning of the noble clan's decline in power and influence. But if we look back, this was also when the Fire Nation military became a lot more efficient, that it expanded, that the Fire Nation Navy became a force to be reckoned with. And there are a number of records to suggest that there were even skirmishes between the Fire Nation and the Earth Kingdom in the Eastern Sea. Now, that rise not necessarily in cultural militarism that we saw rife throughout the 100-Year War, but definitely concentrated and organized military power. Well, it was a big part of the Fire Nation's growing imperial sentiments over the following centuries. The idea that we are powerful, that we are leaders, that we have it right. It's intoxicating, isn't it? Any one of you could feel the same. Any one of you probably has. It is strange to observe these things in our past now, yes, but it is important that we learn from our past, to see these patterns unfolding around us again, to call it out, to know where it's going. Of course, there are many things wrong in the world today, many people feeling that we are seeing these patterns repeating over and over. The Earthen Federalists have gained a foothold in the mainland Senate since the last vote, and they are concentrating their military power. This has been worrying for many of the immigrant waterbending community since the northern polar collapse. Do we see parallels here? Some would say yes. You might say yes. However, Su Wong does not consider the Camellia Peony War in her analysis, which took place between 295 and 296 BG, some century after Sato's works. This is jumping forward to the Kyoshi era for those of you who still work by Avatar time. It was a succession conflict between the noble houses of the Fire Nation, with Firelord Zoryu on one side and his illegitimate brother Sheijin on the other. See, much like what we have come to call the Clean War of the last few decades, calling this a war is a misnomer. There were never any battles, no memorialized deaths, but we must note that following this tense period in Fire Nation history, that decline of the noble clans' influence in our political and economic spheres was accelerated, as Firelord Zoryu made a concerted effort to undermine the noble clans and to further concentrate power in the hands of the royal clan. What we are seeing here is that pattern again, where Avatar Sato weakened the noble clans' legal entitlements and their stranglehold on government bureaucracy as a means to make its administration more efficient, more equitable. This was a decided effort on part of the Firelord to give more legal and cultural influence to his family. In the long term, looking back now, we can see that the changes he made to how the Fire Nation's political systems worked, well, they allowed Firelord Sozin to unilaterally declare war with little consultation with the noble clans, to orchestrate, plan, and execute the Air Nomad Genocide. But building on this theme of rising concentrated and organized military power, especially compared to the rest of the world at the time, there is another historical angle involving the Fire Navy that we need to discuss. Can anyone guess? Yes, Mr. Ao.
The defeat of the 5th Nation fleet in 295 BG. I read that caused Fire Nation naval dominance, especially on the eastern and southern coasts of the Earth Kingdom.
Absolutely burning hot, Mr. Owl. Have a fire flake. Now, the 5th Nation were not a nation, as their title suggests, but rather a loosely organized conglomeration of pirates, mostly a naval power who harassed and controlled trade and ports along the eastern Earth Kingdom coast through the Eastern Sea, and there are records that suggest they plundered the South Pole. But the inhospitable conditions for boats and, well, lack of plunder there rendered many of their raids ineffective. Now, there's quite a bit of historical bias in our records of the 5th Nation because they mainly say and talk about how they're made up of benders from all nations, but genetic and archaeological evidence does suggest that they were primarily composed of non-benders, and we know that they espouse some degree of meritocracy and equality. For the day, this was somewhat remarkable. That a peasant could become a lord, or a pirate lord at least, was unheard of. The 5th Nation, in a sense, was a classist struggle, but one they did not win. Why do I bring them up? The 5th Nation is a mostly forgotten chapter of our history, but when understanding how the 100-Year War began, it is difficult to understate the importance of the Fire Navy's supremacy. The Earth Kingdom has never been a naval power, even to this day, and this proved it. The Fire Nation Navy played a pivotal role in dismantling the 5th Nation's forces in 296 and 295 BG, as Master Ao said. The Earth King requested their assistance. This was the interesting point, and Firelord, well, Well, he was more than happy to oblige, wasn't he? You see, this furthered the Fire Nation's naval supremacy, and more importantly, it legitimized the expansion of their seafaring forces without being seen as aggressive. Though Avatar Kyoshi is credited with the Fifth Nation's total destruction in many of the myths and legends, we now know that she was only a part of it, that this is part of the historical bias we are very accustomed to that credits great things from history to avatars in particular. She likely participated in the parley that wiped out much of their leadership, but their economic base and the remaining fragments of their fleet, of which there were many splinter groups that survived, well, they were destroyed by the Fire Nation Navy of the day. At the time, this victory emboldened nationalist and empire-building sentiments, given there was a growing belief in the Fire Nation that the Earth King couldn't even control his own borders, while the Fire Nation could, that they could restore order to the world. It was primarily a factional belief within the noble houses, led by Clan Tayo and Clan Nensho, who are very eager for you to forget all of that. We have records of their private writings from around 280 BG suggesting these ideas. But by the beginning of the 3rd century BG, do tell me, where do you think this left the Fire Nation in this world order,
The Fire Nation was the relatively undisputed naval power, mostly in the equatorial regions.
Right, but the Northern Water Tribe still held its pull. The Fire Nation wasn't ruling the world.
No, you are quite right, they were not ruling the world. But they didn't need to. The Earth Kingdom's coasts were then being patrolled by Fire Navy ships, and this was of course under the guise of world peace and order. But the crux here is that they controlled trade, and that was all they needed, including the trade going to the Northern Water Tribes. The Fire Nation could charge protection rates for trade ships, and they had a growing influence across the world, culturally and economically in many of the port cities. Port cities that they would later take in the early years of the 100-Year War. See, this flow of capital from the mainland to our island made our ancestors richer, prouder, and so much more prosperous, just feeding into that belief that they were better than the rest of the world, that they were on this great march of civilization. It is true that the world fell into a largely peaceful era, which, again, the old stories attribute to Avatar Yang Chen, but economic records suggest that some of these stories were mythicized or exaggerated for political purposes, and that the peace came from more a large upscale in trade. These 3 events, Avatar Sato's administrative changes, Firelord Zoryu's concentration of power, and the new naval world hegemony positioned the Firelord as an absolute ruler in a world where the Fire Nation already held the upper hand. This was especially since the Earth Kingdom, between Qin the Conqueror and the Yellowneck Rebellion and various assassinations of major political leaders, was at one of its most fragmented and weakest points it had been in many decades. However, does anyone know what we have been missing in this discussion?
Our abundance of stylish uniforms?
Firelord Zuko's swishy bed hair?
Wrong on both accounts, Misaka and Master Ao. So what is the answer? The Industrial Revolution, yes! Heat manipulation, the ability to create steam as well as utilize coal efficiently, it is a firebender's gift. Steam power was used as early as the Sun Warriors, thousands of years prior, but it was mostly ceremonial. It was Akari Takahashi that first applied steam power to turbines. Turbines made irrigation immensely easier, and the crop harvest in the Fire Nation grew year after year, 2-fold, 5-fold, 10-fold by the year 105 BG, Royal Records state. With that, our population boomed. We know that steam engines were first applied around 74 BG to Fire Nation Navy ships, making them faster, more deadly, and they did not need as big a crew as all of the other nations, with perhaps the exception of the waterbenders. And with all of this came another gift. Firebending meant that they could manipulate metal a lot easier than the other nations could. And need I remind you that metal bending was not invented until Toph the Great did so in 99 AG. With metal plating and metal ships and steam power, they made the Fire Nation Navy unchallengeable on the ocean. They ruled the seas. Curiously, though the Firelord did share the designs for the steam engine with the other nations, or at least they were emulated by their engineers, none of them truly picked it up, at least not the way the Fire Nation did. The water tribes needed little irrigation and agriculture on the scale that the other nations did, and the Earth Kingdom lacked the corporate and economic infrastructure to truly use it efficiently, and they were too occupied with warring with one another at the time. By the time of that infamously terrible man Firelord Zorzu's birth in 52 BG, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing within the Fire Nation. The living standards of the people were far higher than in the other nations. Zorzu expanded the education system, partly for propaganda purposes, but it also meant that our population became literate, they upskilled. Studies suggest that a peasant's calorie intake in the Fire Nation was 2 times higher than an Earth Kingdom peasant, and they were nearly 3 times as wealthy. It was common for peasant families to have their own ancestral shrines, perhaps, or maybe to attend an open-air theatre, or to buy imported food, at least comparatively to the Earth Kingdom, whose border states of which were more keen to sell to the Fire Nation than their own impoverished neighbouring states. As Fire Nation citizens, well, they could pay higher prices. See, wealth flowed like a river, rich and clear to the islands. Now, despite calling it the 100-Year War, Su Wong in her chapter on the Clean Colonies period, if you could turn to it, believed that we should be calling it the 123-Year War. Not nearly as catchy, perhaps, but Firelord Zoryu did establish numerous colonies on Earth Kingdom territory in 37 BG. That warped belief, echoed by our own nationalist parties in the Senate in recent years, that these were peacefully established, is not true. Yudao was occupied by the Fire Nation, and the quote, consensual treaty signed by its lord was signed under duress. This is not up for discussion. However, Avatar Roku did intervene, and the colonies were at least temporarily dismantled. And it's for that reason that I disagree with Su Wong's analysis. I believe it is better that we treat these as 2 separate conflicts, the first alluding and leading to the other. Still, this period of a couple of decades before the war, it was tense and uneasy. The war ran cold, but the Earth Kingdom was on high alert, and they were beginning to militarize too. Su Wong now, I believe, did make a brilliant point about the difficulties that the Earth King faced in this period. Despite Firelord Zorzu's efforts to establish colonies on Earth Kingdom soil, some distant states, especially on the southern coast who remembered the ravaging of the Fifth Nation, continued to trade with the Fire Nation for raw materials, food, and luxuries. This is in spite of the Earth King's orders to cease such trading. The status political turmoil you see in the Earth Kingdom must be understood in its proper context for how it set the stage for the 100-Year War. Fundamentally, where the Fire Nation was focused and united, the Earth Kingdom was divided and lacking direction.
But the Earth King did consolidate some power in the mainland territorial regions in the years leading up to the 100 Years' War.
That is true, Master Rao. The Earth King did find a degree of power that they had not seen in a long time under the threat of war, that they truly pushed their people. But it was too little too late, especially with the Great Comet approaching. And with that Great Comet, Zorzu brought about the Air Nomad Genocide, which again, I will ask for your respect and attentiveness in discussing this topic. We have descendants of survivors in this very room, people who were affected by the tragedy. There is the evidential issue, which some conspiracy theorists have latched onto. Fire Nation records are, as I did state, either incredibly rare or biased. Official Fire Nation records of the day suggested it was a military conflict, with near equal forces on both sides. This was entirely fabricated. Archaeological and all other historical accounts do not support this, despite what the Shinjitsu Confederates might have you believe. Our ancestors did, unequivocally, ambush and kill thousands of innocent people, including children. Any mention of it was initially suppressed in the curriculum until they later introduced it around 10 AG, albeit in a very propagandized and limited form. Avatar Aang himself actually recounted that children were being taught that the Air Nomads had a military, or that they even instigated the fight when they attacked a naval vessel, supposedly the warship Aiko. Again, this is not true. Contemporary evidence suggests that this was a false flag attack or an accident that they then later used to justify the genocide. The Firelord knew it would be bad press if the truth ever got out. It was a genocide after all, and especially against ones who so emphatically believe in non-violence. It would be difficult to maintain support for the war publicly if they learned the true scale of their country's war crimes. This may also be why only Imperial firebenders were used in the attack. Sozin only trusted those closest to him to carry out this abhorrent crime. He knew. I believe that is our time for this lecture. I expect you to have read Chapter 4 on the early war period from the Water Tribe perspective by tomorrow. Don't groan, it's not long. Only 60 pages. And I'll be setting your official essay parameters come the end of the week. Any questions, Malfazars, are tomorrow from 10 till 2. All the best, and take care to see the great comment in a few weeks. Flame be with you.